مرحبا وأهلا بكم في برنامج داخل واشنطن. معكم مضيفكم روبرت ساتلوف. هل أصاب الخلل حزبينا السياسيين؟ بعد انتخاباتنا كان من المفترض أن يبدي الحزب الديمقراطي حماسا وشوقا إلى العمل بالنظر إلى فوزه بالبيت الأبيض، ولكن الانقسامات داخل الحزب بين المعتدلين والتقدميين عميقة، كما تبين من فوز نانسي بيلوسي بفارق ضئيل للغاية لتتولى رئاسة مجلس النواب مرة أخرى. والجمهوريون أكثر انقساما بدورهم، لا حول الإيديولوجية وإنما حول الوفاء لجهود دونالد ترامب التي تزداد شتاتا لإلغاء نتيجة الانتخابات. هل سينجو الحزبان من هذه الصراعات؟ هل سنشهد مولد أحزاب جديدة في النظام السياسي الأميركي نتيجة لذلك؟ لمناقشة مستقبل حزبي أمريكا السياسيين خلال هذه الفترة بما تشهده من تغيرات واضطرابات، يسرني أن أرحب بالخبيرين السياسيين الحاكمين برادفورد كين وبرادلي بليكمان. Welcome back to Dakhel, Washington. It's a time of immense change in Washington, not just the inauguration of a new president, but tremors, seismic changes within both our major political parties. We're going to take a look at what all this means for both our political parties, and I'm delighted to welcome two outstanding political experts, Bradford Kane and Bradley Blakeman. Brad and Brad, thank you for joining us on Dakhel, Washington. So, first, Republicans. Who is the head of the Republican Party?
Well, let me say, typically, presidents who are out away, they choose to leave the governance to the new president. We only have one president at a time, and you don't see or hear from him for some time publicly. You're not going to have that with Donald Trump. Donald Trump retains 80 million Twitter followers. He can get news at the drop of a hat. He knows how to do it. So he's not going away quietly. That's the bad news for the Republican Party, because we have to get beyond the Trump era. Certainly, there's going to be a period of inner reflection with the Republican Party. We're going to have to decide where we go, how we get beyond the Trump era, especially when Donald Trump is going to go kicking and screaming, whether he's going to try and be a candidate in 2024, whether he's going to try and influence midterm elections. We've already heard warnings of that. But the Republican Party is going to need some time to look at itself and pick its own leaders as we move forward. And so there's going to be a tumultuous time within the Republican Party. You can count on that.
And Brad Kane, when you look at the Republican Party, you've looked at the reasons why Donald Trump rode a wave to victory in the past. Are those reasons still there? Is Trumpism and what motivated Trumpism still alive and well on that part of the political spectrum? Or has it received its comeuppance in these apparent election defeats from November and in January?
Donald Trump was a manifestation of underlying political forces that have been with the United States since our inception, going back to colonial times. As I discussed in Chapter 1, it's a national identity that is kind of a split personality between rugged individualists and communal collectivists. And that's been playing out through every stage of American history. So what you had in 2016 was when a number of forces, a combination of forces, not just that alone, but many different things combined, kind of in a perfect storm, and gave us Donald Trump. He capitalized, he tapped into it, and he exacerbated it. So it's not as though he just created it. He didn't. He tapped into it. So it is something that will remain with us. However, I think that because of it having been coming to full exposure and it kind of in full flowering by him being in the White House, by being in power, the country now, and in particular Republicans, have seen where this can lead and what happens now. So the fascinating part about what happens starting January 20th is that the national identity, which is a split personality in general, you're also going to see within the Republican Party an identity crisis. Basically, there are long-held Republican values and Republican principles, and so many Republican elected officials have departed from that which has been traditionally associated with Republicans. So right now, there's a big internecine discussion. You're seeing it play out today, even with their multiple camps in terms of what's going on with today's activity in Congress. And it's going to play out over the years to come in a very major and consequential way.
So actually, let me focus in on this for a minute, Brad Blakeman. The head of the Senate, Mitch McConnell, begged his fellow Republicans, please don't go down the path of protesting the Electoral College certification. It's a losing bet. It'll just make us look silly, et cetera, et cetera. But a dozen or so of his colleagues decided are going down that path, even though they stand no chance of success. Why? What does this say about McConnell? What does this say about them?
One of the reasons why we're seeing Republicans in the House and the Senate voicing objections is because they want to create a record for historical purposes. They know that their efforts will not overturn the election, but they're shining light on some very serious irregularities. Now, were the irregularities material enough to change the election? No. But the fact is, irregularities did occur. And even the appearance of fraud on a massive scale is something our nation should not be subject to. If anything, it will prove once and for all that America is in dire need of uniform national voting standards. We should be voting the same in every state. Every procedure should be the same. And we shouldn't be running off to the courts or changing the rules in midstream.
Brad Kane, do you think there will be any lasting impact of the effort to invalidate the election results?
It is actually exacerbating this tension within the Republican Party. Now, it's very interesting, as my counterpart Brad just mentioned, in terms of grievance. Part of the reason why I titled this my book "Pitchfork Populism" is it's actually a false populism. So what you're seeing right here is that it's based on trying to elevate. Normally, populism is about the people. So we've had a long history in the United States of economic populist movements and agrarian populist movements, a lot of things in the 1800s, and for example, out of Kansas and the People's Party and William Jennings Bryan, things like that. This is different. What this is that Donald Trump basically mobilized a cohort of the electorate to empower him. Normally, populism empowers the masses, the people. This was him mobilizing them based on their grievances and their feeling like they were disaffected and not being listened to or whatever. Basically, he got them to empower him to do what he wants. That's not populism. Authoritarianism is not American. It is contrary to American democracy. And that's one of the great things about the Republicans who are standing up to that as well. And that's the reason why there's the fissure among the Republicans, is that there are a lot of Republicans who actually care about American democracy. But you see this group of 12 in the Senate objecting and many more in the House objecting. I think that is something that is cresting. And there is a price to pay for doing that. And once Trump leaves and people start seeing his 4 years in correct context and get a fuller picture of what he did to the country, and basically based on his own transactional approach, for his own whims, for his own interests, his own pecuniary interests, all those kind of things, the Republican Party, I believe, is going to start to move away from associating itself with that.
All right, when we come back after the break, we're going to take a look at whether we're at a inflection moment where we might even see a split within the Republican Party, and what control of both Congress and the White House means for the future of the Democratic Party in just a moment. 26 times in American history, presidents have sent nominations to the Senate only to see them fail. 15 times, nominees were withdrawn before a vote. 9 times, they were rejected by the full Senate. And twice, they never even made it out of committee. But there's been only one outright rejection in the last 50 years, when the Senate voted 53 to 47 against the confirmation of President George H.W. Bush's nominee for Secretary of Defense, John Tower. What made this so unusual was that Tower was himself a senator, a major political figure from the state of Texas, and senators almost always defer to fellow senators on confirmation. But what was relevant in this case is that the senators knew their fellow senator all too well, and they knew he liked to drink just a little too much. When the Tower nomination failed, who did Bush pick instead? The lone congressman from Wyoming. A man named Dick Cheney became Secretary of Defense. The rest is, as they say, history. Our guests today include Bradley Blakeman. Brad is professor of public policy, politics, and international affairs at Georgetown University, and former president of the conservative advocacy group Freedom's Watch. An attorney by training, he served in the White House under President George W. Bush as deputy assistant to the president, and he was a close advisor to his father, President George H.W. Bush. Also joining us today is Bradford Kane. He is the author of Pitchfork Populism, 10 Political Forces That Shaped an Election and Continue to Change America. He began his career as legislative counsel on Capitol Hill and has since had a career that took him from President Clinton's task force on healthcare reform to serving as the state of California's Deputy Secretary of Information Technology, to also many roles in the private sector. He received his law degree from the University of California, Hastings College of Law. So just before we turn to what's going on inside the Democratic Party, let's just ask very quickly for our viewers who like to follow the personalities, when you look across this battered and bruised Republican Party today, who are the 2 or 3 most likely candidates as of today to emerge from the ashes of this election to be the party leader when we look out a year or 2 down the road, outside of somebody whose last name is Trump? Brad Blakeman?
I think you'll see a number of leaders emerge or try and take the mantle from Donald Trump as the head of the Republican Party. I think those likely suspects are Senator Cruz from Texas. I think Marco Rubio from Florida. I think Josh Hawley from Missouri. All U.S. senators are likely to emerge as the leaders of the party. Of course, there is a chairman or a chairwoman of the party right now who has a fixed term for another year. So Ronna will serve at least until her term expires. And then we'll have to see how it shakes out. But they'll be jockeying for sure. I think Republicans now have to have a post-mortem.
Brad Kane, when you look at the Joe Biden inauguration and you look at this very close situation, probably 50-50 in the Senate and only a couple of vote majority in the House, does this suggest to you a moment of compromise and bipartisanship, or a moment of obstruction and no progress at all?
I love the question. That's exactly aligned with where I think things are going. The good news here is that this is January 20th will be the start of a new era that will be kind of an opportunity, even with the Republicans having their own issues internally. It creates an opportunity for people to come together, find some common elements, some common purpose, as I describe in my book, there's kind of an 80-20 rule as it is. Maybe it's 80-20, 90-10. Most things actually do happen in a bipartisan way, just below the radar, below the visibility of the high pressure issues. But right now, especially after everything, and consider also the crisis that we're in, everything from COVID health to COVID economy, and the need for racial justice, and of course, climate change. All these priorities are things that a lot of Republicans also care about.
Bradley, we just heard Bradford suggest that we might have a moment of compromise and bipartisanship. When you look at where the Republicans are and the names you just mentioned, people jockeying for leadership, are they interested in a moment of bipartisanship and compromise?
It depends on the issue. If it's the new Green Deal, the answer is no. If it's raising taxes, the answer is no. So there'll be compromise on things that make sense. And when the Republican Party will stand on principle, it's not a surrender of principle or politics. This is a reset for our country. But certainly I think Republicans will be up for compromise if they think that it's in the best interest of the country. But the radical agenda will be stopped in its tracks. I can assure you that.
I want to ask both of you. I know we've been talking about how the Republicans are facing a difficult moment now of reconciling with the voters. Democrats didn't do particularly well in November either. In fact, the Democratic majority in the House shrank considerably. And yes, while it looks like they may pull out a victory in Georgia that puts them 50-50, they could have expected to do a lot better in Senate elections in November. Is there also an internal reconsideration among Democrats about what they need to do to get their message out better among the voters? Bradford?
This is not a country of extremists. Yes, of course, we do have some extremes on both sides, but that is part of the reason why Trump has been rejected. And at the same time, there's not great enthusiasm nationwide for extreme solutions on the left either. But I think that's part of the problem when if opponents resort to sloganeering and trying to kind of combine things into taglines and creating fear and all that, that's not constructive. We are generally centrist as a nation when you look at us, across the entire country. Left-leaning, left of center, but that doesn't mean extreme. So, for example, with the environmental, for example, there's a huge amount of progress that can be made. There's a huge amount of progress that I believe Joe Biden and Kamala Harris will be making on environmental issues. That doesn't mean you take it to extremes and do extreme solutions. No, there are a lot of very sensible, science-based, rational solutions that are necessary for the sustainability of the United States, both our health and our economy and everything, that will be very meaningful for many years to come. And I think that there are a lot of Republicans who agree with that we do have to think of the future and have a sustainable approach, not doing extremes, but taking very important steps also to make sure that we don't die of toxic ingestion, and to make sure that our air and water and land remain safe for years to come. So that's where I think that there is room for a lot of collaboration, left of leaning center, left of center leaning.
When you gentlemen look at our two parties, do you see them as strong, vibrant, cohesive, or are we at that moment like 150 years ago, 200 years ago, when one of our major parties had a schism? And perhaps are the Republicans facing a moment of schism where we might have the party of Trump and then the party of more establishment Republicans? Is that what we're facing? Or will they figure out how to come together? Bradley?
Our party is diverse, and we have factions within the Republican Party, as Democrats have within their party. They're the far right, there's the center, and everybody else in between. And we have to broaden our base. We've made terrific inroads under Donald Trump's leadership in minority support. We have to continue and build on that. We have to field candidates that represent America. So we have a party that will unite. It will be tough, but certainly there's not going to be a schism so large as to have a split in the party. America has not been able to sustain a third party. We have sustained third-party candidates, but those have been one-offs. There's never been, so far in American history, a viable third party, and I don't see that happening out of the Republican Party at this time.
All right. Well, gentlemen, Brad and Brad, thank you for helping us think about the big picture and what happens to our two political parties at this moment of tumultuous change in our American democracy. Thank you for joining us on Dakhel, Washington. We've had national crises before, but we usually don't change presidents in the middle. Lincoln was president for all but the final 3 weeks of our 4-year Civil War, when he was then assassinated. He was reelected along the way. Roosevelt was president for all but the final 3 months of the 6 years of World War II, when he died in Warm Springs, Georgia. He too was reelected for 3 times. This fact underscores the shifting taking place in America right now, 2 months after 150 million citizens were given the option of affirming its current leadership or choosing an alternative, and resoundingly chose to change course with a new president in our November election. This was the most bitter election in my memory. It wasn't the closest. Bush versus Gore in 2000 came down to just about 500 disputed votes in the state of Florida. To change the outcome of the 2020 election would have required much larger shifts of votes in multiple states. But it was, in my view, the most bitter. So bitter that millions of Americans still tell pollsters they remain convinced the winner stole the election, despite no evidence to support the claim, members of Congress among them. Now, I'm not naive. I realize that politics is a contact sport. It's not a gentleman's sporting match, and it's often winner take all, a fight to the finish. I also realize that there are serious issues at stake about the fate of our nation, the lives and livelihoods of our families, the future of our planet, and that people of goodwill can disagree profoundly on the best way to safeguard our nation, our families, and our planet. But I also believe that elections have consequences, that a victor should be given deference to implement his or her policies in good faith, with due regard to the rights and prerogatives of the legislature. That principle, I should add, works both ways. The election for our Congress went in the other direction, defying predictions to strengthen Republicans in the House of Representatives. There, too, there must be a full airing of the complicated, sometimes contradictory will of the people. I hope we give our system a chance to work. We're in the middle of a public health crisis whose death count will soon surpass the total number of Americans killed in uniform during World War II. With the prospect of mass vaccination, the end is in sight, but only in sight, not imminent, and certainly not assured. For all our sakes, I hope we come together as a nation to give our new president a chance to succeed in this most urgent of tasks. بهذا نصل لنهاية هذه الحلقة من برنامج داخل واشنطن. إذا كانت لديكم أي استفسارات أو تعليقات حول هذه الحلقة، وخاصة حول مسير حزبينا السياسيين، أرجو أن تتواصلوا معي عبر تويتر على هاشتاغ Inside Washington، أو أن تراسلوني مباشرة على @RobSatloff. سأراكم الأسبوع المقبل، وإلى أن ألقاكم، شكرا لكم وإلى اللقاء.